Chapter 1463. Yi Liangqiu looked at her directly. Su Qing shrugged. Anyway, I'm not the one who feels sorry for you. When she turned around, it was Su Qing who was driving. She insisted because Yi Liangqiu's mental condition was not very good. She said, I don't want to be in the news with you. Su Qing drove very well. Yi Liangqiu sat beside her with her eyes closed. In fact, she was not relaxed at all. Don't worry. I'm not that stupid. If anything happens to you now, Su Shiqing will not let me go. Su Cheng's voice was a little cold. Yi Liangqiu did not reply. There was nothing to say to a schizophrenic. To the company. Su Qing chuckled. You're really diligent. But you better pray that Su Shiqing will get a terminal illness soon, or else all your efforts will be in vain. Yi Liangqiu still ignored her. Su Qing had no choice but to concentrate on driving. The car went up the highway and went down again, driving steadily. But at the front of the road, there were a few delinquents racing, and a few off-road motorcycles screeched on the road. One by one, they overtook Su Cheng's car. The last one even brushed against the car, and the white Bentley shook a little. Su Qing cursed in a low voice, and her fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly. Damn, if Yi Liangqiu was not in her car, she would have done something to these little bastards. She held back at the thought of it. But the delinquents in front of her turned around and looked at such a hot car and such a hot girl. He whistled, and 5 motorcycles immediately surrounded them. Su Qing squinted her eyes, gripped the steering wheel tightly, and said slowly, sit tight. The cars surrounded them from the front and back. They pointed their middle fingers at the car and whistled. Call Su Shiqing and ask him to find a way to inform the traffic police. Su Qing stared at the front fiercely, paying attention to the situation of these little bastards. Yi Liangqiu had already taken out her phone and made a call. Su Shiqing immediately did it. Howls could be heard from outside the car. Su Qing coldly said, I really want to kill these bastards. She slowed down the car to let the 5 cars pass, but the motorcycles turned around and blocked Su Cheng's way. Su Qing sat there without moving. Those few cars stepped on the accelerator, their front tires sticking up high, very arrogant. Moreover, those punks did not look like good people. Su Qing looked ahead and reached out to open the car door for Yi Liangqiu. You have long legs. Cross to the opposite lane. No matter what happens, leave me alone. Yi Liangqiu's body felt light as she was gently pushed away. The door closed immediately. She watched as Su Qing sat in the car and quickly shifted gears. She stepped on the accelerator and the car shot out like an arrow. The punks put on their helmets and charged over, unwilling to be outdone. In a flash, the white Bentley flew into the air. The rear of the car bumped against 3 motorcycles, and they were instantly knocked down. The last 2 motorcycles were also knocked down. The friction between the 5 cars and the ground caused sparks to fly. Su Qing made a sharp turn and drove against the traffic on the highway. When she passed by those cars, she jumped again. The car stopped steadily in front of Yi Liangqiu. Get in. Yi Liangqiu got in the car and looked at the few fallen ones. What about them? They won't die. Su Qing turned her head and suddenly smiled sweetly. Sister Liangqiu, don't you think I'm cool? Chapter 1464. She looked at Su Qing. Have you learned how to race before? Su Qing smiled. I used to date a racer. She paused for a moment. However, before my skills were better than his, I dumped him. Yi Liangqiu did not say anything else. She thought back to Lin Xingyuan's death. Back then, the car had flipped. That car accident. Could it have been an accident? Where did the other person in the car go? The knife wound on his body was clearly inflicted by Lin Xingyuan while he was driving. The fact that the other person could escape from the speeding car meant that the other person's driving skills were very good. She looked at Su Cheng with a thoughtful look in her eyes. Su Cheng looked back at Yi Liangqiu and smiled. Do you suddenly feel that I am not useless? Yi Liangqiu retracted her gaze and looked forward. After returning to the company, Su Shiqing naturally asked about it. Knowing that it was fine, he did not say anything else. Before Su Qing, Yi Liangqiu said softly, "It was Qing Qing who dealt with those people." Su Shiqing smiled. "In that case, you should thank Qing Qing properly." Su Qing hugged Yi Liangqiu's arm. "Tonight, I want to sleep with Sister Liangqiu. Look, she is sticking to you now." Su Shiqing followed suit, acting like an ordinary loving father. Yi Liangqiu slapped Su Qing away. "I like sleeping alone." Su Shiqing had already left. Su Qing tilted her head. "You don't like sleeping with Qi Nanlin." Yi Liangqiu took 2 steps forward and Su Qing retreated. However, there was a look of excitement on her face. Finally, she leaned against the wall. Yi Liangqiu pressed against her and gently placed a finger on her lips. "It has nothing to do with you." After saying that, she walked toward her office. Su Qing stomped her foot. "How annoying. That's why I saved you. Worry more about yourself," Yi Liangqiu said to her. Su Qing bit her lips, then put her fingernails in her mouth and gently bit them. Then, she smiled foolishly. "She was worried about me. She cares about me." Yi Liangqiu walked back to her office. Her assistant, Linda, came over and said, "Mr. Yi, you have a meeting with King Entertainment's President Qin at GM Hotel at 4 p.m. Yi Liangqiu nodded. After a pause, he asked, "Does the president have a schedule in the afternoon?" Linda smiled. "I think I have a private appointment." Yi Liangqiu nodded to show that she understood. After Linda went out, she sent a message at the door. At 2:30 p.m., Yi Liangqiu left the company. She sat in the back seat, and as the car slowly pulled out of the ATV's parking lot, she looked away. It was Su Shiqing's car. Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips and took a few more glances. Who would Su Shiqing be meeting at this time? The chauffeur looked at her and said, "Mr. Yi, is there anything else?" "No, I'm going straight to GM Hotel." Yi Liangqiu's tone was indifferent. After driving for about an hour, they arrived at GM Hotel. She got out of the car and asked the chauffeur to wait in the car. She walked to the elevator alone, but was stopped by an arm at the corner. Then, she was pulled into a black limousine. It was very dark in the car, and she couldn't see anyone at all. She lay there, and could only smell a familiar scent, Anlin. She cried out in surprise and looked up. In the dark, his eyes were clear and deep as he looked at her. She called out softly and unconsciously said, "Why are you here?" Chapter 1465. Mr. Yi, remember, the best performance is to forget that you are performing. Be the Mr. Yi of ATV, and you will be absolutely safe. His voice whispered by her lips. What about Su Qing? She looked at him with a burning gaze. His fingers slowly paused, and he looked at her. Even in the darkness, she could feel the heat. After a long time, his voice was soft. Do you think that after what happened in the morning, you will still suspect that Su Qing will hurt you? Yi Liangqiu's eyes widened, and she couldn't believe what he said. I was the one who sent those 5 people. His fingers slowly caressed her red lips. Liangqiu, I know what you're thinking, and I've more or less confirmed it now. But... He bent down and whispered in her ear. She was suddenly surrounded by a burst of heat, and her whole body trembled slightly. Keep her. She'll make sure that you'll be safe in the Su family. He bit her ear. Silly girl, you're nothing compared to Su Qing. Yi Liangqiu's world was turned upside down. She couldn't believe what he revealed, and she couldn't speak for a long time. In the hotel where Lin Xingyuan stayed, there were Su Cheng's fingerprints. She probably didn't think that I would go to the hotel to check. Qin Anlin's voice was slow. She revealed too many flaws, and the biggest flaw is that she treats you too well. She pushed his hand away and sat up. Anlin. I don't believe it, Su Qing actually treats me. Did she ask to sleep with you? Qin Anlin smiled. She was silent. After a long time, she asked softly, how did you guess? Qin Anlin looked at her silently for a long time, then slowly opened his mouth and said shamelessly, because she didn't have feelings for me. If it's not a homosexual, then what is it? Yi Liangqiu's worldview was completely ruined. After a long time, she finally said, then. I'm not, she won't, Qin Anlin said firmly. If she wanted to do anything to you, she would have done it a long time ago. Su Cheng is both complicated and simple. She is just like a child, wanting to get what she wants. But the more Yi Liangqiu thought about it, the more terrified she became, because Su Cheng wanted to sleep with her at any time. At this time, Qin Anlin told the driver to drive. She tilted her head. Where are we going? I'm taking you to a place. His voice was indifferent. However, the calmer he was, the more she had a bad premonition. The car made a few turns and stopped. He pulled her out of the car and into the exclusive elevator. They went to the presidential suite on the top floor. Opposite the study of the suite, there was a huge rear projection. Qin Anlin walked over and sat on the desk. He undid his tie, picked up the remote control, and pressed it. The image slowly became clearer. Yi Liangqiu was stunned. Because the person on the screen turned out to be, she looked at Qin Anlin with a shocked expression. Su Shiqing was actually with that person. Wasn't that person? There are no eternal friends. There are only enemies who appear out of nowhere. Qin Anlin's tone was indifferent. That's not what you should be concerned about. He enlarged the image and showed her the person squatting in the corner. Wasn't that person the person she contacted to follow Su Shiqing? She suddenly looked at Qin Anlin. He found out. Qin Anlin dragged her over and hugged her in the middle of his body. Chapter 1466. She turned her head, her expression a little solemn. He kissed her lips. Liangqiu, being soft-hearted will never make you invincible. She looked at him, her lips trembling slightly. She probably realized what he wanted to say. His voice was low. The person you sent to monitor Su Shiqing has been discovered. Yi Liangqiu looked at the screen, watching the man being tied up. Su Shiqing didn't know what he said, but the man was beaten up, and blood slowly flowed from the corner of his mouth. He will say that he is my man. Qin Anlin's voice slowly sounded above her head. But I think Su Shiqing will kill him in order to warn me. Her body trembled a little. She slowly turned her head and looked up at him. Liangqiu, just be Mr. Yi of ATV in the future. Leave the rest to me. He reached out to stroke her hair, then buried her head in his arms, not letting her see the blood on the screen. Her head moved in his arms, but he held it very tightly. Liangqiu, don't look. She knew what had happened, and she buried herself in his arms and cried. Mrs. Su had gone crazy. She had never cried like this when Wang Kaiyun died, or even when her father died. She was crying now because she was helpless. She was crying because she couldn't help it. Anlin, am I very naive? She looked up with tears in her eyes. Qin Anlin looked at her for a long time before he said softly, no, you're just too kind. It was just that she had never known how dark human nature could be. She closed her eyes and didn't speak for a long time. It was already 7 o'clock at night when she returned to the ATV. The lights were on. She got out of the car and looked up at the behemoth in front of her. There was no warmth in her eyes. The driver asked softly, "Mr. Yi, do you need me to help you carry your bag up?" She turned around and looked down. "I'll carry it myself." She knew that she couldn't avoid it, couldn't retreat. When she stepped into the elevator, there was a rare touch of coldness on her face. He looked straight into the mirror and saw himself in it. The elevator went up one floor at a time. Every time the red number jumped, her heart sank a little. What she didn't expect was that Su Qing would be standing in front of Su Shiqing's office. She winked at Yi Liangqiu. "Sister Liangqiu, it's going to be bloody later. Hang in there." Yi Liangqiu didn't say anything, but when she passed by Su Qing, she felt a little strange. She recalled that when she returned to the Su family, Su Qing had only spoken harshly. It seemed that she had never really hurt her. Her gaze fell on Su Chang's face. With a gentle sweep, she opened the door. The moment she opened it, she saw the man lying on the table, pressed down by two people. His whole body was covered in blood. She held her breath, but her face was calm. "Dad, are you looking for you?" Su Shiqing sat on the sofa with a calm expression. He was wearing a snow-white shirt, but there was a smear of red on it. It might have been accidentally stained. He was holding a cup of tea in his hand. He blew it lightly and took a sip. Then, he gestured for her to come in and sit down. Yi Liangqiu sat down next to him. He raised his chin. "Do you know this man?" She shook her head. He waved his hand, indicating for her to go up and take a look. "What's wrong, Dad?" she asked as she walked up to the direction of the man's face. Chapter 1467. When his eyes met Yi Liangqiu's, they were like a pool of stagnant water. He knew very well that if he betrayed Yi Liangqiu, he wouldn't be able to live. Neither Su Shiqing nor Qin Anlin would let him off. He panted and stared at Yi Liangqiu with his bull-like eyes. His face was full of hatred. Yi Liangqiu took a step back and subconsciously covered her lower abdomen. "Dad, I don't know you. You don't know me, but I know you," the man said while panting. "You're a shameless woman who betrayed President Qin." Yi Liangqiu tilted her head and looked at Su Shiqing. Su Shiqing was still sipping his tea. He seemed to be quite satisfied with it. Then he looked at Yi Liangqiu. "Liangqiu, he was sent by Qin Anlin to spy on me. I can't let him go back. You've helped me settle it." As he said that, he took out a small gun from a secret compartment on the coffee table. "This is suitable for you." Yi Liangqiu took the gun. It was heavy. She looked at Su Shiqing. There was a slight smile in his eyes. "Put on the silencer." Yi Liangqiu's tone was very calm. Su Shiqing asked his men to help her put it on. She held the gun and walked towards the man step by step. She raised her hand and pulled the trigger without any hesitation. When the pool of blood flowed down, she was stunned for a moment. Then she turned her head and looked at Su Shiqing. Su Shiqing was still sipping his tea. He looked leisurely and only asked lightly, "Done?" She nodded. Su Shiqing smiled. "If you were asked to kill Su Qing, you wouldn't hesitate, right?" Yi Liangqiu handed the gun to his men and walked over to sit next to Su Shiqing. It was as if she didn't do the bloody thing just now. "Wipe your hands. It smells like blood." Su Shiqing smiled. "Why? Is it difficult?" Yi Liangqiu wiped her hands. "I thought we didn't need to do such a bloody thing with our own hands." Su Shiqing was startled and sighed after a while. "Yes. You're still pregnant." I don't want you to do it. He pulled himself together. You don't have to worry about this. Go down. Yi Liangqiu's eyes paused for a moment. Before she left, she looked in the same direction. After a long time, she finally walked out. She missed her shot just now. If she could treat him now, he wouldn't die. However, he would disappear from Su Shiqing's world forever. This was her request to Qin Anlin. If she could live, let that person live. If their safety, their happiness is built on the dead bodies of others, she will not feel at ease. With his hand on the doorknob, Su Shiqing suddenly said, "Do you know what you did wrong?" She paused. Because you didn't hesitate. A person who hasn't killed anyone before shooting without hesitation must have made up his mind to do it. Yi Liangqiu said calmly, "That's because Dad is too paranoid. I can only do what you want. I have no choice." With that, she walked out. Su Shiqing narrowed his eyes and sighed. This daughter had a personality, just like him when he was young. But she was not easy to control. He believed what she said. When Yi Liangqiu walked out, Su Cheng was still there. Seeing her walking towards the elevator, she followed. "Let me drive for you. I think your legs are weak now. You know about it again." Yi Liangqiu entered the elevator and looked at the follower. Su Cheng smiled happily and made a gesture. Bang! Chapter 1468. Su Cheng smiled happily and made a gesture with her hand. Bang! Yi Liangqiu pointed at Su Cheng's head like a gun. "He asked me to blow up your head too." Su Cheng was not surprised at all. She even hugged her arm and said in a sweet voice, "I knew you wouldn't." Split. Yi Liangqiu pushed her away and walked towards the car in the parking lot. "You don't have to drive. Su Cheng, take care of your head. Don't blow it up. Keep your life. I will get it back for Xing Yuan one day." Su Cheng watched her start the car and leave. She stood straight and then laughed softly. That old guy really couldn't stand it anymore. He thought she was a thorn in his flesh. He thought she didn't know that the 20% of the ATV had fallen into his hands. Now, Su Cheng was no longer useful to him. However, she was not that stupid. If she wanted to play, then play. Hurt each other. They could actually eat at the same table for dinner. "Sister Liangqiu, if I were you, I would probably vomit for 3 days." Su Cheng smiled sweetly at Yi Liangqiu and said in a low voice. Yi Liangqiu ignored her. "What are you talking about?" Su Shiqing flipped through the newspaper and said indifferently. The servants in this house had been unusually quiet recently. They could guess what had happened without the mistress of the house, but no one dared to say anything. Su Cheng continued to smile sweetly. "Dad, it's nothing. I just wanted Sister Liangqiu to help me look at a dress tonight, so I ordered it. That's all you know." Su Shiqing folded the newspaper. "You should do something serious." Su Cheng smiled sweetly. "My serious business is to dress up beautifully." She stood up and turned around. "Dad, do I look good?" Today, she was wearing a light yellow neckline dress. The top was a little tight, and her waist was not big enough to hold, but the dress was loose, making her look playful and sexy. Su Shiqing took a few more glances, smiled, and lowered his head to eat. "Of course it's good. Our Ching Ching has also grown into a little beauty." Su Ching skipped to his back, bent down, and wrapped her arms around his neck. Her breath smelled like orchids. "Then will Daddy bear to let Ching Ching marry someone else in the future?" When she was talking, her body was tightly pressed against Su Shiqing. As a man, how could he not know that a girl was deliberately seducing him? He frowned. Ching ching. Then I'll go look for Daddy tonight. Daddy can take a look at me. She stuck out her tongue and sat down to eat again. Su Shiqing looked uncomfortable. Yi Liangqiu watched a good show. Although Su Shiqing was her father, she didn't feel much about it. She only felt that it was ridiculous. She went to bed early so that Su Qing could do whatever she wanted. Su Qing climbed onto Su Shiqing's bed. It was really an inconceivable place. However, this was a very beneficial thing for taking down Su Shiqing in the future. Late at night, Su Shiqing leaned against the headboard, smoking. The smoke lingered, and he felt a little lonely. He missed Hongku, the young Hongku. The door opened, and a beautiful figure walked in. She was dressed in red. It was Hongku, whom he missed. Su Shiqing's eyes were burning red, and his fingers were trembling. He subconsciously called out, "Hongku, you're here." "It's my Shiqing." The woman walked to him and held his face. "Shiqing, I'm back. I'm back to look for you. We'll never be separated again, okay?" Chapter 1469. Su Shiqing looked a little stunned as he let the woman kiss his face. At this time, his whole body was tense and he could not move. The alcohol mixed with an unknown heat made him unable to judge whether it was real or fake. He only knew that there was a fire in his arms. "Hongku, I can finally hold you." When he reached middle age, he turned into a wolf that had been hungry for a long time. He hugged the woman in his arms tightly, and his lips blocked her lips like a hot plug. The masculinity of a man was tainted with a touch of delicacy. In his arms, on his bed, the woman was torn apart. Then, after everything calmed down, he kissed her body soothingly, like a treasure. His rationality slowly returned. The hot sweat also became slightly cold, and it was a little cold in the air-conditioned room. "Hongku, don't leave in the future." Su Shiqing stroked the woman's black hair in his arms, his chin resting on the top of her head, and whispered softly. At this time, he felt infinitely beautiful. All the unwillingness in this life had been soothed, and he even wanted to stay like this until he was old, as long as he had Hongku. As his heart softened, the woman in his arms said, "Okay, Ching Ching will never leave you." Su Shiqing was startled, and his whole body felt cold. He suddenly pushed Su Qing away. "Why is it you? What did you do?" He actually fell into her trap. Su Qing got up lazily, her black hair scattered on her smooth back, an indescribable temptation. She tilted her head and smiled happily. "Let me think. Did I drug your tea, or did I pretend to be your favorite woman?" Su Shiqing's face was extremely ugly. He narrowed his eyes and looked at Su Qing. "Do you know what you're doing?" "I know. Going to bed with you, and then, if I'm not careful, I might even go on social news. Think about it, causing such a scandal, you." Su Qing smiled gently, her slender white fingers poking Su Shiqing's chest. "Can you still keep your position as ATV CEO?" Su Shiqing's face darkened, and he stared at Su Qing. Su Qing smiled sweetly. "Are you angry? Will you use the same method to deal with me? Find someone to rape me." "It's useless. I'm not that weak. Unless you take a gun and, bang, end my life." Su Qin leaned on his shoulder and whispered into his ear, "But if that's the case, our highlight videos will appear on the official websites of all the major media companies." Su Shiqing slowly calmed down and took out a cigarette from the bedside table. He lit it and took a puff before asking softly, "What do you want?" "ATV." That was absolutely impossible. Su Qing chuckled. She put her hand on his shoulder and snatched the cigarette from his hand. "I don't take away the most important things of others." Su Shiqing didn't say anything, just quietly looked at her. Su Qing chuckled. I just want to live and be a rice worm in the Su family. Is it that simple? Su Shiqing looked at her coldly. Su Qing leaned over and nibbled on his ear. What else can I do? Be more ambitious and be Mrs. Su. Su Shiqing's eyes were cold, and he pulled Su Qing down. This is not a joke. She giggled and then straightened herself before him. Her youthful body glowed seductively, and there was not a single part of her that was not beautiful. Chapter 1470. You're crazy. Su Shiqing spat out a few words angrily, then pushed Su Qing down. Su Qing smiled like a silver bell, her little face resting on his shoulder as she exhaled. Then do you like it when I'm sick? Su Shiqing had already started working, panting heavily. I like it. He liked it fiercely, but after venting, his spirit was a little empty. At night, Su Qing fell asleep. She slept peacefully, without a trace of vigilance. She hugged his arm with her hand, looking like she depended on him. Su Shiqing didn't understand. A girl like her, who was so scheming, could actually see through so many things about him. She was just as ruthless as he was. In order to survive, she did not hesitate to give up her body. But she could also lie beside him like a child. Su Shiqing's heart actually felt a trace of softness. Su Qing was very much like Hong Ku when she was young, always so bright and energetic, like a ball of fire. Or perhaps, her name, Qing, represented what he was thinking. Su Shiqing didn't sleep that night. Many thoughts flashed through his mind. First, calm her down, then get the video. Kill her. But in the end, at dawn, Su Shiqing made a call to the local household registration office and removed Su Qing from the Su family. From today onwards, she no longer had anything to do with him. But only his woman. Her young body comforted his soul. In a sense, she used her body in exchange for a chance to survive, and he just agreed. At dawn, he lovingly took her again. Su Shiqing felt as if his body had been given a new lease of life, full of youthfulness. When he got up to take a shower, Su Qing fell asleep. When he returned to the bedroom, she was still asleep. Su Shiqing sat by the bed and pinched her face with his fingers. Rest at home today. Su Qing woke up and used the blanket to cover her body, revealing only her little face. Then, she lay on his knees and giggled. Su Shiqing couldn't do anything to her. His fingers reached under the blanket to comfort her, and she became obedient, hiding under the blanket with a red face. I'll come back to accompany you tonight. He cleared his throat and didn't stay any longer. Su Qing watched him leave. When the door closed, she pulled out a small bottle from her palm. He opened it and smelled it. Then, he chuckled. What a nice smell. It was enough to make Su Shiqing fall into the dream of tenderness every day. Just as he was thinking, the door opened. It wasn't Su Shiqing, but Yi Liangqiu. Their eyes met, and neither of them looked away. She was prepared for it. Yi Liangqiu knew about it, and Yi Liangqiu had heard the commotion last night. She looked at Su Qing and sneered. I might have to call you stepmother in the future. Su Qing let the quilt slide down, revealing her tormented body. She didn't care at all. It doesn't matter if you want to scream now. She walked into the bathroom without any cover and washed herself. When she came out, Yi Liangqiu was still there. Su Qing swallowed a small pill in front of her and said coldly, Don't worry, I won't give birth to a child to fight with you for the family property. Yi Liangqiu stared at Su Qing's face for a long time before she asked, Have you thought about what you want? Is it worth it to pay such a high price? Chapter 1471. The good mother in your eyes, as long as she thought of you, she would burn wax and drip it on my body. Once, I almost died. My tender flesh has all been transplanted with skin. Su Cheng's eyes were filled with tears. In order to survive, I will do anything. I learned to use my most advantageous weapon. Yes, I already knew you were in the Yi family. You are their child, but I didn't say it. If I said it, I wouldn't be able to live like now. Su Cheng's eyes did not have a trace of warmth, but Wang Kaiyun, that stupid woman, would think that I was raised in a rich family and was enjoying a good life. Yi Liangqiu was shocked. Compared to me, your sin is nothing, you know. Su Qing smiled softly, laughing until tears flowed out. On the surface, you look good, but you don't know when you will be played to death. There is nothing wrong with sleeping with Su Shiqing. At least I can continue to live a luxurious life. Maybe in a few years, he will marry me. Su Qing smiled softly. I will tell that madwoman that I climbed into her husband's bed 5 times in one night. Ha ha ha. Yi Liangqiu looked at Su Qing, only feeling sad. Su Qing was already distorted, living like a walking corpse. She didn't know what she wanted. Perhaps everything she did was just to seize. She slept with Su Shiqing because Su Shiqing no longer valued her. She was like a child who wanted to regain Su Shiqing's attention and take revenge on Mrs. Su. Su Qing, you like me, don't you? Yi Liangqiu took 2 steps forward. There was a trace of panic in Su Cheng's eyes, but she quickly calmed down. You think too much. Yi Liangqiu, let's mind our own business. Su Qing slowly stepped forward and leaned over. If you want to get the ATV, you have to kill him. Yi Liangqiu didn't speak again and went downstairs. Downstairs, she saw Su Shiqing. Su Shiqing, who had been busy all night, looked very energetic. He had already eaten breakfast. When he saw Yi Liangqiu coming over, he raised his hand and gestured for her to sit beside him. For this kind of intimacy, they would usually talk about intimate matters. She knew that it had something to do with Su Qing, so she smiled faintly. Dad, what's the matter? Su Shiqing looked at her. He probably still had some integrity in his heart, so he felt a little awkward and didn't say anything for a long time. On the other hand, Yi Liangqiu drank a mouthful of milk and said lightly, Is it related to Su Qing? Su Shiqing looked at her for a long time before saying, It has something to do with Qing Qing. He coughed lightly. She's no longer an adopted daughter of the Su family. Daddy wants to marry her. Yi Liangqiu asked bluntly. Su Shiqing coughed softly. Not necessarily, but she will be with father for the time being. Sleep. Yi Liangqiu nodded in understanding. The empty room can be used as the baby's room. It can also be connected to my room. Su Shiqing almost choked. His daughter was too direct. You don't blame me. He patted the back of her hand, like a loving father. Yi Liangqiu's heart also cursed. He used to treat Su Qing like this, but now he was pouncing on her like a beast. It was probably because of the lack of blood ties that a man's moral bottom line was infinitely lower. She forced a smile. I understand, Dad. The corner of Su Shiqing's mouth twitched and he didn't say anything else. Chapter 1472. Su Qing used her body to conquer Su Shiqing, making him feel as if he was rejuvenated. Other than going to work, he would come back at night to accompany the little vixen for 300 rounds. Every night, Su Qing would feed him medicine. 1 pill was enough for him to last 2 hours. And he never knew that Su Qing could be so open. She was like a blood-sucking vixen, pestering him and not missing a single night. But even so, Su Shiqing still felt healthy and more youthful than before, so he doted on Su Qing even more. He brought Su Qing to many events. Naturally, there were rumors. And because of this, Yi Liangqiu was relieved. Su Shiqing was like a ferocious beast. Now that a female beast had been let in, he was naturally busy mating with the female beast and had no time to care about the prey. Yi Liangqiu and Qin Anlin were at King Entertainment discussing the collaboration project. Because Linda was also there was no chance to talk. It wasn't until she left King Entertainment that Linda started the car in the parking lot that the car broke down and couldn't start. Forget it, I'll take a taxi to the hospital. Yi Liangqiu put down her briefcase. Linda was a little hesitant. She knew that the president had asked her to look after Mr. Yi. Now that Mr. Yi was alone, she couldn't take responsibility if anything happened to him. Just then, a black limousine passed by slowly. The window rolled down and Qin Anlin's side profile was revealed. He looked at Yi Liangqiu calmly and said, "Is the car broken down?" Yi Liangqiu nodded. "I remember that today is the day of your prenatal checkup." His voice was calm. "Get in." Yi Liangqiu didn't move. "I can take a taxi myself." His voice became stern. "It's 38 degrees outside and you want my child to stand under the scorching sun." "It's my child." She snorted. Qin Anlin glanced at her. "Without me, can you get pregnant?" At this time, Linda felt that it would be a little unreasonable if she didn't speak, so she persuaded, "Mr. Yi, you should go with President Qin. It's too hot." Yi Liangqiu looked at her and said, "Thank you." Linda smiled. "It's fine." Only then did Yi Liangqiu get in the car, and the black limousine slowly drove away. Linda was a woman. She felt that this matter was related to the child and had nothing to do with work, so she didn't tell Su Shiqing. Moreover, she really couldn't understand why the CEO was with Su Qing. This was too damaging to their worldview. He could play with any woman he wanted. Su Qing was raised by them after all. Could it be that this was a game played by the rich? First raise them, cultivate their feelings, and then eat them up. Just thinking about it made her scared. Linda was Su Shiqing's confidant, but a few things that happened recently made her hair stand on end and she didn't want to do it anymore. In the car, Yi Liangqiu and Qin Anlin drove for a long time before they spoke. He held the steering wheel and looked at her. "Why aren't you saying anything?" Yi Liangqiu looked down. "I don't want to say anything." The car drove to an intersection, and it happened to be a red light. He looked at her and smiled. "Liangqiu, are you acting coquettishly?" "Yeah." She said gloomily, "Sort of." He held the steering wheel with one hand and pinched her little face with the other. "You're cuter than before." She glared at him, but he didn't say anything else. He started the car and continued after a while, "Are you missing me after seeing Su Shiqing and Su Qing being intimate every day?" She turned her head and glared at him. Chapter 1473. He sighed. Su Qing is really ruthless. She's capable of doing anything. No one had expected such an outcome. Su Shiqing probably hadn't thought of it either. Yi Liangqiu nodded. "She's staying in the same room with Su Shiqing now. I guess she gave Su Shiqing some medicine. Then should I take some medicine next time?" He was joking to tease her. Because from this afternoon onwards, she looked as if she had nothing to live for. Yi Liangqiu didn't say anything. It was obvious that she was distracted. He didn't disturb her. After a long time, she said softly, "Anlin, I hate Su Qing, but I suddenly feel sorry for her." Until now, she hadn't asked Su Qing about Lin Xingyuan. If she asked, Su Qing might admit it or not, but Yi Liangqiu wasn't ready yet. If she admitted it, she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to control herself and wouldn't be able to live with them peacefully. "Anlin, I feel like it's all a dream." She looked at his side profile. I really want to wake up from this dream. I really want to be by your side when I wake up. You're by my pillow, and it's your familiar smell. Qin Anlan's heart was also a little wet and soft. He took out a hand and rubbed her hair. Liangqiu, I like your confession. It's quite nice. The car slowly drove to the underground parking lot of the hospital. He unbuckled her seatbelt, but she hugged his waist and buried her face in his chest. She had never been so attached to him, nor had she been so fragile. Her voice was very low. Anlan, I miss you. In that kind of environment, I missed you every day, every minute. I missed you when I was pregnant, and I missed you when I was fighting with Su Shiqing and Su Qing. But we could only sneak around and use the excuse of the child to see each other. She didn't know when the next time would be. He lowered his head to look at her. How could he not know her thoughts? He caressed her hair with one hand and held her slender body with the other. His voice was a little hoarse. Liangqiu, hold on a little longer. If there was no mistake, he could have killed Su Shiqing right now, however, he couldn't do it now. He didn't have enough evidence, so he couldn't completely overthrow Su Shiqing. Instead, he would hurt Liangqiu, because a cornered dog would do something desperate. She nodded obediently in his arms. Her softness made him feel pity for her. He lowered his head to kiss her, kissing her lips over and over again. When the passion was at its peak, he rolled down the window and the car was pitch black. She was lifted into his arms, her back against him. He pressed his lips against the back of her soft neck and asked shamelessly, "Do you miss me when you look at them every day, huh?" Qin Anlan. She struggled. Let go of me. I want a prenatal checkup later. She would lose face if he behaved like this. But he didn't let go of her. He held her waist with his fingers and rubbed her up with his other hand. You seem to weigh more than before. I'll try it when the child is born. His lips moved to her little ear and he bit it lightly. Then, he chuckled. Try it and see if it's sweet. She was so embarrassed that she wanted to punch him. Don't you like to try it too? He continued to teach her naughtily. Is it salty? Her whole face was red, but he coaxed her with a serious face. It's not convenient here. Be good, I'll give you one. Lower your voice. After saying that, he continued to torture her shamelessly. She couldn't stop trembling, feeling as though her soul was going to be sucked away. Chapter 1474. She was lying on his shoulder. She was already a mess. Her hot breath blew on his neck. It was warm, and his heart warmed up as well. He hugged her with one hand and adjusted her dress with the other. She buried her face in his neck and looked at him. I'll feed you next time. Be good. His voice was unbelievably gentle. Yi Liangqiu sat on him and naturally felt his eagerness. However, he only satisfied her and helped her dress as if nothing had happened. He really, really loved her. She pursed her lips and hugged him tightly with her slender arms. She said coquettishly, Anlan, do you love me very much? She looked up at him after she said that. Qin Anlan's answer was to pat her little butt gently and chuckle. I want to hit you. She smiled sweetly and buried her face in his chest. Anyway, I know. You know again. He pretended not to care and patted her head. Okay, get out of the car and go for a prenatal checkup. She was annoyed when he said that. She looked at him and said, How do you want me to go for a prenatal checkup now? What if the doctor sees through it? He coaxed her comfortingly, I've already wiped it clean. They won't see through it. However, Dr. May's eyes were very sharp. She frowned as soon as she entered the examination room. Have you had sex before? Qin Anlan heard it from outside and replied shamelessly, I have had sexual contact. Yi Liangqiu felt that she didn't need to be a human anymore. Was there anyone like him? Dr. May was also experienced. She didn't bat an eyelid when she heard such an irritating question. It must have been hard on you, Anlin. You've changed your career to Lu Xiaohui. Qin Anlin didn't want to continue. He rubbed his nose and didn't say anything. However, Dr. May looked at Yi Liangqiu and chuckled. Don't be fooled by his previous foolishness. He's really good to you. I've never seen him look at anyone like that before. If a man liked a woman, it could be seen with just a glance. Moreover, being able to guard his wife's desires and not act recklessly, that was true love. Dr. May checked her fetal heart, prescribed some calcium tablets for her to take, and made an appointment for the next prenatal checkup. Once a month. Qin Anlin was a little displeased. Auntie May, this prenatal checkup has to be more detailed. Once a week is better. Dr. May laughed and scolded, Are you a doctor or am I a doctor? If you want to see your wife, think of a way to do it yourself. The hospital is not a good place for a date. Qin Anlin rubbed his nose and didn't say anything else. It was already 5:30 p.m. when they got in the car together. He looked at her. Shall we go back after dinner? Yi Liangqiu looked at him and suddenly said, Let's go eat at the Su family's house. Didn't you go there often before? Qin Anlin's gaze was fixed on her for a long time before he said softly, You've improved. With that said, he pinched her face. Then let's go have a meal with him. As he started the car, he suddenly grinned, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. We can also take a look at your little stepmother at the same time. Yi Liangqiu sneered. When my little stepmother calls you Anlin go later, you'll have to bear with it. Qin Anlin thought about it and felt the hairs on his body stand on end. He drove the car out of the parking lot and headed in the direction of the Su residence. An hour later, the car slowly stopped at the entrance. He looked at the tree at the entrance and said lightly, Liangqiu, I didn't expect you to be Su. Chapter 1475. Qin Anlin reached out and stroked her head as if he was stroking a puppy. I was almost 10 years old at that time. How could I not remember? He scratched her nose. I only remember that you loved to cry and always hugged me and called Anlin Gu. Hearing this, she realized that he was making things up. She glared at him. I didn't expect you to be so annoying when you grew up. He stroked his smooth chin with his fingers and looked thoughtful. Su, when you hugged me and told me to use more strength and go deeper, why didn't you say that I was annoying, huh? Yi Liangqiu couldn't bear to listen to him anymore. She snorted and ignored him. He smiled and drove the car into the courtyard. Everyone in the Su family looked at his strength and felt that it was amazing. Qin Anlin got out of the car first and opened the door for her. The two of them walked into the living room side by side. On the sofa in the living room, Su Shiqing was reading a business magazine while Su Qing was painting her nails. Her feet were placed on Su Shiqing's lap, and he didn't object. Such an action was undoubtedly a declaration of their relationship. The servants in the family were angry but didn't dare to say anything. Sir and Miss were too outrageous. They were raised together, and now they were sleeping together in public. If the previous madam knew about this, she probably wouldn't be able to swallow it. Yi Liangqiu and Qin Anlin walked in and blocked the light. Su Qing looked up, she squinted her beautiful big eyes and hooked Su Shiqing with her little foot. Shiqing, Anlin Gu is here. Yi Liangqiu glanced at Qin Anlin. Qin Anlin thought to himself. What the fuck? Su Shiqing looked up and saw them appear together. He looked at Yi Liangqiu. My car broke down. President Qin drove me to the hospital and back. Let's have a meal together. Yi Liangqiu's tone was calm and businesslike. However, Qin Anlin refused. I won't be eating. I'm just here to say hello. Although their personal friendship was torn apart, there were still a lot of cooperation on the surface. Su Shiqing wouldn't let the situation be too embarrassing, so he stood up and said, Anlin, you haven't eaten here for a long time. Let's eat together. Su Qing also got up and hugged Su Shiqing's arm. Yeah, Anlin Gu, you haven't been here for a long time. Qin Anlin looked at Su Qing with a complicated expression. He felt it was a pity. Su Qing was very smart, but her personality had been twisted since she was young. That was why she had done so many shady things. He had already checked the road surveillance cameras. Many of the cameras showed that the last person with Lin Xingyuan was Su Qing. In other words, Su Qing killed Lin Xingyuan probably because Lin Xingyuan did not listen to her. In order to prevent him from betraying her, she chose to silence him. Now that she had given herself to Su Shiqing, with Su Cheng's terrifying personality, she would definitely kill Su Shiqing. At that time, Su Cheng would not be able to live. He thought that after catching the culprit, he would destroy this person. After all, it was the person who separated him from Liangqiu. But it was different now. Even if Su Qing didn't do it, Su Shiqing would do it. However, their goals were different. Compared to Su Shiqing's ambition, Su Cheng's desire was so small that it made his heart soften. She actually just wanted to live with Liangqiu. She didn't care how she did it. She didn't even care if she slept with a beast like Su Shiqing. Her humbleness even made Qin Anlin feel a sense of pity. After all, he had watched her grow up. Chapter 1476. Although there were thousands of thoughts running through his mind, he maintained a faint smile on his face. Ching Ching. Su Qing wanted to smile brightly, but she was unable to do so. Because she could see that although Qin Anlin and Yi Liangqiu were separated, they were still in love. This was something that no one could change. Neither she nor Su Shiqing could change it. For the first time, Su Qing pitied herself. Just like what Yi Liangqiu had said, she was a pitiful person. She did not even know what she wanted. However, even if she knew, would she dare to say it? It was the most beautiful and obscure thing buried in her heart. Qin Anlin's gaze told her that he already knew. Su Qing felt as though she had been sent to the 18th level of hell, a life worse than death. However, she was still smiling, still pretending to be happy. The meal was quite a routine. Qin Anlin and Yi Liangqiu acted like strangers. Su Shiqing was not too friendly either. In the end, Su Qing and Qin Anlin chatted for a while before parting on bad terms. Qin Anlin quickly drove away. However, Su Shiqing would not let Yi Liangqiu go so easily. Why are you with him again? We just happened to bump into each other. She held a cup of fruit tea and said softly. Didn't Linda tell Dad? Su Shiqing nodded thoughtfully. You and Anlin, it's not like there is no way to save them. Forget it, I am not interested in being a widow. After saying that, she got up and walked upstairs. Su Shiqing's gaze fell on the stairs. At that moment, Su Qing sat down and leaned into his arms. Sister Liangqiu and Anlin Gu are together. Are you unhappy? No. His face turned pale. I just feel that I can't see through her. Because she is pregnant. Pregnant women need love. Su Cheng's fingers gently stroked his heart. Just like Dad, sleeping alone at night, you will feel lonely. She pulled him up the stairs and clung to him like a fairy, all night long. Su Shiqing felt like he had been hollowed out, but he was still in good spirits the next day. He felt that Su Qing made him feel young again. Of course, he also found a few young girls in the company to try, but it was not as exciting as being with Su Qing. Therefore, Su Qing started to pamper her. In Su Shiqing's heart, as long as she was obedient and didn't want to play tricks, he didn't mind pampering her and buying her all kinds of things she wanted. One night, Su Shiqing coughed up a mouthful of blood. He was also stunned, staring blankly for a long time. After a while, his gaze fell on the pill on the side. Su Qing was shocked and knelt in front of him. Shiqing, what happened to you? Su Shiqing's expression was somewhat gloomy. After a long time, he lightly said, "Nothing. It's probably because of excessive internal heat." How was this supposed to be relieving the fire? How did it become inflamed? Why don't we go to the hospital for a checkup? Su Qing said carefully. Or is it because you are old and can't take these pills anymore? Su Shiqing's gaze fell on her. She had long black hair and only had a thin bathrobe on her body. Her small face was beautiful and she looked at him with her lips slightly opened. Old. He pinched her chin and suddenly pressed her down, biting her throat fiercely. Su Qing was shocked and struggled with all her might. However, he quickly pressed her hand down and didn't let her move. She was pinned high above her head, and she was firmly pinned down like a cross. Chapter 1477. Su Cheng's hand struggled, desperately trying to catch something. However, she could not catch anything. She could only catch the air. Her pupils dilated as she desperately breathed, her body twisting violently. The feeling of impending death was so real that it was frightening. Su Shiqing used the last of his energy to hold her. At the moment when she was about to suffocate, he moved the pillow away. The large amount of air she inhaled caused her to cough violently. Her hand covered her mouth in pain. Su Shiqing rolled to the side and spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes were a little dazed and his body was twitching slightly, like a dying patient. His ugly appearance made Su Qing chuckle softly. She used one hand to support herself and crawled over. She leaned on his body and pinched Su Shiqing's face with her fingers. Her expression instantly turned fierce. Su Shiqing, get up. Hit me hard. Didn't you say you're not old? Su Shiqing panted heavily. His gray eyes turned to look at her. He stared at her silently like a ghost. Su Qing patted his face. What's wrong? You're not moving. Don't you know that you're like a dead fish now? After saying that, she laughed crazily. She laughed so hard that tears almost flowed out. Su Shiqing, you're like a dead fish. But now. Her eyes were scarlet, like a small cluster of flames burning. A thin iron wire had appeared in her hand. She approached him with a coquettish expression. Daddy, I'm going to kill the fish now. She wrapped the iron wire around his neck and gently tightened it. Her slender fingers gently stroked his lips. Did you have fun just now? Now, it's my turn. She slowly tightened her grip and her face tilted to the other side. Did it feel good? Did you feel like you can't breathe? Is it painful? Her voice was gentle as she said, Daddy, be good. Qing Qing will be gentle and gentle. Su Shiqing's eyes almost turned white. He grabbed her hand and tried to resist. Su Chen exerted more force and her voice became stern. Su Shiqing, there's no point in struggling. Her hand tightened. Die, Su Shiqing. She will end your sinful life, and in the future, she will be the queen of the Su family. I will take good care of Sister Liangqiu and her child. Don't worry, I'm not interested in the Su family's business. I just want to live well with Liangqiu, Jia. She lowered her face and kissed Su Shiqing's lips, so disgusting, the smell of an old man. Every time I have sex with you, I feel disgusted. It must have been hard on my mother for so many years. She tightened her grip again and again, increasing the strength of her hands. It was as if she could hear the sound of bones cracking. In this quiet night, it was especially clear. The man in her hands suddenly collapsed, his body twitching weakly. Su Shiqing is dead. Su Qing suddenly put down the iron wire in her hand, and her expression finally changed. She muttered, "You forced me to do this, you forced me to do this." Her body started to feel cold. After all, she had just had physical contact with the man on the bed. Now that he was dead on the bed, it made her hair stand on end. Just as Su Qing was feeling afraid, the bathroom door opened and a figure walked out. Chapter 1478. Su Chen tilted her head in slow motion and looked at the person standing at the bathroom door. Su Shiqing. There were two tall men standing beside him. They were at least 190 centimeters in height. Their hands were placed in front of them. Their muscles were bigger than a woman's. Her mouth trembled and she moved back a little. In the end, she leaned against the headboard of the bed. Her back was covered in sweat and her bathrobe was soaked. The one who died on the bed was not Su Shiqing, but a body double. "Qing Qing, it seems your heart is more ruthless than mine." Su Shiqing smiled. "Do you know what you did wrong?" Her voice trembled. "What?" "Honka will never forgive me. Why would she come to my side? Even in my dreams, she will not come." He looked at her calmly. "I only had sex with you once. As for what happened after that, it was just a body double. If she did not have any evil thoughts, he would have thought that she only wanted to live and he might not have killed her. However, this child seemed to have grown up in a wolf's den. She was used to seeing killing." Su Qing gritted her teeth. "You will get your retribution. But it will not be your turn." Su Shiqing's tone was light. "By the way, you like Liangqiu?" This was something Su Shiqing did not expect. However, he could almost guess why Liangqiu would return to the Su family. It was probably because of Su Qing. "It seems your ability is beyond my imagination." Su Shiqing stepped forward and pinched her chin. "You caused the marriage between the Su and Qin families to fail, His fingers exerted force and two red marks appeared on Su Cheng's cheeks. Her eyes widened but she could not say a word. For a woman who cannot be controlled, it is better to die. His voice was cold as he looked at her. He raised his hand and the two men behind him stepped forward. One of them held onto Su Qing. "Throw her into the sea to feed the fish." Su Shiqing's voice was calm. Su Qing struggled with all her might but her hands and feet were still held. To prevent her from resisting, her bathrobe was removed and her hands were tied. The bedroom was quickly tidied up without a trace of blood. Su Shiqing sat on the edge of the bed, wearing a white bathrobe that was spotless. The door was opened and Yi Liangqiu was standing at the door. Su Shiqing raised his eyes and looked at her. "Su Qing was disobedient and wanted to kill me. Liangqiu, will you also want to kill Dad?" Her face was a little pale, and she looked at him for a long time before she shook her head blankly. Su Shiqing went crazy. Just as Su Qing had said, the Su family was full of lunatics. It was her return that caused everything to intensify and destroy the calm on the surface. "Liangqiu, Dad has already taken care of Su Qing. In the future, no one will stop you from being with Anlin. Be good, go and apologize to Anlin. Dad will prepare for your marriage." Su Shiqing waved at her, asking her to come over. She stood there without moving. No matter how clean this place was, there was still a thick smell of blood in the air. "Are you afraid?" Su Shiqing stood up and walked towards her. He put his hand on her shoulder and said in a low and hoarse voice, "Dad will never hurt you." He hugged her in his arms. Liangqiu, Dad only has you left. Don't leave, Dad. She was surrounded by the thick smell of blood and felt like vomiting. In her mind, she was thinking about Su Qing, Su Cheng's smile, Su Cheng's tears, and Su Cheng's smiling and crying face. She actually wanted to cry and was reluctant to part with him. Chapter 1479. Her voice was trembling a little. Where's Su Qing? The smell of blood. Did it belong to Su Qing? I threw it into the sea. Su Shiqing said emotionlessly. It was as natural as killing a kitten or puppy. Yi Liangqiu took a step back and looked up at him. Her whole body was stiff, but her tone was especially calm. Dad, I want to rest. His gaze fell on her face as if he was judging her. After a long time, he smiled and said lovingly, you should be tired. Sleep early. He even reached out and stroked her head. Little Su, sleep early. Dad will wake you up tomorrow. Yi Liangqiu's body and heart were cold. She didn't know how she got back to the bedroom, but when she came back to her senses, she realized that she was in Su Cheng's bedroom. There was a doll at the head of Su Cheng's bed. It was a rabbit. She reached out and patted it. Su Cheng's crisp voice came from inside. Sister Liangqiu. Yi Liangqiu looked up and closed her eyes gently. She should hate Su Qing. But at this moment, she knew that Su Qing would never come back. She felt a sense of desolation. The rabbit was still crying. Yi Liangqiu's gaze fell on it. Suddenly, she picked it up and squeezed it. It was hard. She found a utility knife and cut open the rabbit's stomach. It turned out to be a diary. She flipped to the first page. There was a sentence written on it. Sister Liangqiu, by the time you see this diary, I'll probably have left. You're crying, aren't you? Yi Liangqiu covered her mouth immediately. She didn't cry. But hot tears flowed out from between her fingers. Su Qing, you're still so annoying and so self-righteous. No matter how much I hate you, you can still stick to Sister Liangqiu and call me Sister Liangqiu. I'm not sad. I'm not sad at all. It's useless even if you act cute. However, she could not stop crying. Whether it was Su Qing or Mrs. Su, it was a tragedy. Yi Liangqiu flipped to the back of the diary. Everything was revealed. Lin Xingyuan was killed by Su Qing. He and Su Qing had been together for a long time. He was Su Cheng's chess piece. As for Yi Sun, the outstanding younger brother in her heart, he was the one who shocked her the most. Su Cheng's diary, Yi Sun actually liked big sister Liangqiu. That kind of liking had already reached an abnormal state. He peeked at her in the shower, collected her underwear, and even kissed her in her sleep. Would he rape Sister Liangqiu one day? Yi Sun went to the pharmacy to buy medicine, the kind that could make people happy. I knew he wanted to do something to big sister Liangqiu, so I went to seduce him. He took the medicine himself. I told everyone that he wanted to rape me. Many people thought that he was innocent, but only the two of us knew that he wasn't. There was a beast living in his heart. He wanted to rape his own sister all the time. I wanted to stop him. He didn't go to jail because of Anlin Gu. But in my opinion, big sister Liangqiu was really stupid. She begged Anlin Gu for someone who wanted to hurt her. Was it worth it? And only by hounding Yi Sun to death, will the world be peaceful. This is what I owed her. I returned it. But I never thought that she would fall in love with Qin Anlin. What was so good about him? He was worthy of big sister Liangqiu's love. He would only make her sad. He would only trample on her self-esteem. He was a coward. He didn't deserve love. Chapter 1480. When little Mu Yun was born, I fell in love with him because he was Sister Liangqiu's child. He had nothing to do with Qi Nanlin. He was Sister Liangqiu's precious baby. I asked Lin Xingyuan to get close to her and take care of her. I even wanted her to live with Lin Xingyuan. That way, I would be satisfied. At least, she would be happy, but why did she come back? Sister Liangqiu, why did she come back? Yi Liangqiu closed the diary. She closed her eyes and seemed to see the real Su Qing. It turned out that every time she called Sister Liangqiu, it was from her heart. Her love was a little twisted, but it was sincere. She hurt Xingyuan and Nanlin, but she loved her and Mu Yun. She had protected her for so long. She didn't agree with such love, but she couldn't be indifferent. She burned the diary and went downstairs with the car keys. In the study on the second floor, Su Shiqing stood by the window and watched her drive out. You finally know, Su Shiqing murmured, but Su Qing won't be able to live, so it's good to send her off. Su Qing did not do so much for you in vain. Yi Liangqiu drove very fast. At this moment, she almost forgot that she was pregnant. She had no way to repay Su Qing, her good, her bad, but she really couldn't be indifferent to Su Chang's death. Even if she saw her dead, she had to pick her up and bury her properly. The dark sky was filled with dark clouds, adding a touch of sadness to the night. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly as she drove towards the sea. An hour later, she drove to an empty space where an off-road vehicle was parked. Two tall and strong men stood by the car and smoked. They glanced at Yi Liangqiu's car and then made a call. After he hung up the phone, he glanced at her briefly before driving away. The night was as dark as ink. She stood alone by the uninhabited seaside. The waves were blown by the night wind and lapped against the shore. The sound was like a lullaby sung by her mother when she was young. Yi Liangqiu stepped on the beach, his feet deep and his feet shallow. Su Cheng. She called Su Cheng's name over and over again. But what answered her was still that weeping and complaining song. Su Cheng, you damn child, come back if you dare. Aren't you the strongest? You've committed murder and arson. How could you be killed so easily? Yi Liangqiu kept slapping the water as she walked towards the deep end. In the boundless dark night, the boundless sea rose and fell, but he could not find her figure. I know, you're a useless guy, that's why you died. Yi Liangqiu's voice was filled with rage. Come out, I haven't avenged Lin Xingyuan yet. You're a coward. Are you afraid that I'll take revenge? Who's afraid? A hand suddenly caught her leg. Yi Liangqiu almost jumped up and screamed. But who else could it be but Su Cheng, who was lying on the ground under her feet? If it weren't for you, I wouldn't know where to swim to. Su Cheng said self-deprecatingly. Sister Liangqiu, isn't it true that bad people live for thousands of years? Yi Liangqiu scooped her up and stared at her. Su Cheng laughed dryly and her body went limp again. Yi Liangqiu slapped her hard. If you dare to die, I'll let 4 men rape you right now. Chapter 1481. Yi Liangqiu closed her eyes and slapped her again. If you want to have fun, then live well. If you like women, I will find you countless women in the future. She carried Su Cheng's shoulder and walked through her car. Su Cheng's face was crooked on the side of her neck and she smiled weakly. But I only want you. I don't want anyone else. Yi Liangqiu struggled to carry her to the car. She found a towel to dry her and wrapped her up. I will drive you to the place where I used to live. She paused for a moment. I will bring you some money tomorrow. Then you will leave and never come back. Su Qing drank some water and regained some strength. She looked at Yi Liangqiu and looked down. How could you believe it after reading my diary? Maybe it is a trap. I would rather believe that there is beauty in this world. Yi Liangqiu started the car. Take it as my repayment. They raised me. You are the only child of the Yi family. Su Qing did not speak again. Yi Liangqiu drove her back to her hometown. That place was already modeled and very old. Stay here for now. I will find a way to give you more money tomorrow. The further you go, the better. Yi Liangqiu knew that Su Qing was used to a good life. She could not live without money. She had a lot of assets under her name given by Qi Nanlin. Some of them were cash. It was not a problem for her to take out 1 or 200 million yuan. Su Qing was lying with 2 blankets on her body. She looked around. Will there be rats here? You even dare to kill people. Why are you afraid of rats? Yi Liangqiu rolled her eyes. But she still checked and finally said, I can't guarantee it. Sister Liangqiu, can I go home with you? Su Qing said pitifully, I will be worried about you if I am not here. Yi Liangqiu sneered, you're about to lose your life, and you still have the nerve to say that. Speaking up to here, Su Qing hatefully said, these days, the one sleeping with me at night is a substitute, not Su Shiqing. Yi Liangqiu glared at her. Don't you dislike men? Can't I double kill it? Su Qing said uncomfortably, if you don't feel anything, you can pretend. Anyone can do it. Yi Liangqiu was annoyed and amused at the same time. Did you manage to fool Su Shiqing? She was almost killed. Su Qing fell silent. After a long time, she said, Sister Liangqiu, go back to Qi Nanlin. You can't beat Su Shiqing, only Anlin Gu can protect you. Yi Liangqiu looked at her. Su Qing smiled bitterly. In the past, I was too naive. I thought that I could protect you, and we could live happily in the Su family. But ever since Su Shiqing drove my mother crazy, I knew that I was too naive. Yi Liangqiu looked at her for a long time, not saying anything. If you go back now, it's not too late. Su Qing coughed. Don't go back to the Su family tonight. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If you go back, you won't be able to go back anymore. Because you're so stupid, Su Shiqing will know that I'm not dead, and he will never trust you again. Those who can't be trusted will have a miserable ending. Yi Liangqiu nodded. Okay. I'll go back. But just as she finished speaking, the door opened and Su Shiqing entered. Su Qing immediately got off the bed and stood in front of Yi Liangqiu, staring at Su Shiqing. Qing, if you had used your loyalty on me, you wouldn't have ended up like this. Su Shiqing looked around and his eyes finally fell on Yi Liangqiu's face. Liangqiu, go back with Dad. Chapter 1482. Yi Liangqiu looked at him and saw a murderous intent in his eyes. She paused for a moment and said, I want Su Qing to go back with me. Su Shiqing looked at her. Are you going to oppose me because of her? He raised his hand and 4 men in black appeared behind him. Each of them held an A** and pointed at Su Qing. Yi Liangqiu was faster than ever. She stood in front of Su Qing and looked at Su Shiqing fearlessly. Dad, if you want to kill Su Qing, you'll have to kill me first. The veins on Su Shiqing's forehead were bulging. He looked at her and gritted his teeth. Liangqiu, do you know what you're saying? You want to save her, but think about who you're trying to save. She almost killed Qin Anlin and your father. Su Shiqing's voice was cold. Are you sure you want to turn against me because of her? Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips. But she's no match for Dad, is she? The determination in her eyes shocked Su Shiqing. This daughter was very similar to him. No one could stop her from doing whatever she wanted to do. In the end, he took a step back. But I won't let her go back to the Su family. He wasn't worried about his own safety, but because with Su Qing around, Liangqiu wouldn't listen to him. Su Shiqing said calmly, I can let her go, but if she appears in front of me again, I won't let her go. Yi Liangqiu turned around and looked at Su Qing. She took a step forward and said in a low voice, Go find Qin Anlin. Only Anlin could protect her now. But Su Qing didn't want to go. If she left, what about Liangqiu? If she went back to the Su family, she could protect her and leave the Su family. Without her, how could Liangqiu fight against the Su family when she was pregnant? Let's go. Yi Liangqiu growled and pushed Su Qing away. She stuffed her car keys into her hand. Drive, don't stop. I believe you can leave this place alive. Su Qing understood from her eyes that if she stayed, she would still die. If she left, there would still be a way out. Holding the car keys in her hand, her eyes felt a little hot. She still loved Sister Liangqiu. She still liked her. But from now on, her feelings were different. She wanted Sister Liangqiu to be happy. If she was really happy, she would do anything. For Lin Xingyuan, for Yi Sun, for everything she had done, she was willing to go to jail. Su Cheng's eyes were filled with tears. Sister Liangqiu, I'll be back. In her pajamas, Su Qing slowly walked past Yi Liangqiu. When she reached downstairs, she started the car and got out of the car. The brake thread was cut. Su Qing sneered and quickly connected it. It was barely usable. She quickly drove away and sped along the road. The night breeze caressed her face. She cried. She cried for herself and for Sister Liangqiu. She had willfully caused all of this. She liked Sister Liangqiu. If she had known that this would be the outcome, she would not have done this. She would not have ruined her. Of course, Su Qing was cursed on the way, but her driving skills were superb. She managed to shake off those people. An hour later, the car stopped at Qin Anlin's apartment. At this time, the front of the car was smashed into pieces. When Qin Anlin opened the door, Su Cheng's body slowly collapsed. Before she fainted, she said a few words unconsciously, "Save Sister Liangqiu." Qin Anlin frowned. He carried Su Qing to the sofa in the living room and pressed on her chest. Probably because of her willpower, Su Qing came back to life. Chapter 1483. Qin Anlin looked at Su Qing expressionlessly. He's crazy because you forced him to be crazy. Su Shiqing used to be a hypocrite, but now he's a madman. It was Su Qing who activated his attributes. Su Qing grabbed his arm. Anlin Gu, please save Sister Liangqiu, okay? Her life will not be in danger for the time being. If I go now, it will be. Qin Anlin said slowly. Only he knew that his heart was not so calm. He took out his cell phone and dialed Keim's number. Gather people immediately near the Su house and wait for my instructions. Keim agreed and went to do it. Qin Anlin put down the phone and did not go out immediately. Instead, he paced back and forth in the living room for 2 minutes. His eyes fell on Su Cheng's face. You've been by Su Shiqing's side all these years. Didn't you get any evidence? Su Cheng's lips tightened. It took her a while to speak. I'm not interested in business. Qin Anlin held back his anger. Are you only interested in killing people? Su Qing raised her little hand and said weakly, No, I'm only interested in Sister Liangqiu. Qin Anlin couldn't help but roll his eyes. She really had the nerve to say that. However, I have a video in my hand. Su Qing suddenly said. Qin Anlin looked at her. It's a video of me and Su Shiqing having sex. I think if it's released, it will be a big blow to ATV. Su Cheng's face was pale, and her hand was holding the sofa. Qin Anlin looked at her. Are you sure? If it's released, you probably won't be able to stay in B City in the future. Even the whole world will know you. Su Cheng's lips trembled slightly. I don't care. I'm not a woman. She shrugged. I like women. Doing this kind of thing with a man is like, she couldn't go on. Qin Anlin slowly walked over and reached out to pat her head. Su Qing seemed to be shocked. She raised her eyes and looked at him. She didn't expect that after all the bad things she had done, there would still be someone who was willing to give her such warmth. Anlin Gu. Tears welled up in her eyes. Am I very bad? Qin Anlin nodded before wiping away her tears. Lowering his head, he said, although I really want to bring him down, Qing Qing, I will not use such methods. You are a girl, you will have to marry someone in the future. Marry? Su Qing repeated these two words over and over again, and then she started to cry. Can I still get married? She sobbed and asked Qin Anlin. She didn't like men, but at this time, she yearned for an ordinary family. She gave birth to a child. Maybe she didn't love the man very much, but she loved her child very, very much. Just like how he loved little Mu Yun. That kind of life must be wonderful. Qin Anlin smiled. Of course. Su Qing threw herself into his arms and sobbed. Anlin Gu, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, Sister Liangqiu. Qin Anlin's voice was low and hoarse. Even without you, this day will come. Behind the scenes, Su Shiqing had been the one controlling everything. Every move of Su Qing was probably under Su Shiqing's eyes. Although she was ruthless, compared to Su Shiqing, she was still too inexperienced. Su Qing looked up. Will Sister Liangqiu be okay? No. Qin Anlin's tone was resolute. Su Shiqing needs an heir. Chapter 1484. At this moment, Yi Liangqiu and Su Shiqing stood together in the place where she had lived for many years. There was a faint smell of decay in the apartment due to the passage of time. Su Shiqing frowned. You must have suffered in the past. Yi Liangqiu's voice did not change. Dad, you knew I was here, didn't you? I found out much later than Su Qing did. Su Shiqing did not deny it. Yi Liangqiu walked out slowly. Separated by a long and dilapidated hallway, she looked at the night outside through the dusty window. Dad, do you think Su Qing is still alive? She turned sideways, looked at him and smiled. Su Shiqing's heart was filled with mixed feelings. His daughter's composure was just like his. She could actually still talk to him. She should know her situation. She was either a pawn or a fish. Su Shiqing stood beside her, his voice a little cold. Liangqiu, I want to tell you that I have frozen essence violet in the hospital's freezer. I can use it to give birth to an outstanding heir at any time. Yi Liangqiu looked down. Is this a showdown? She looked at him. Dad, you said you love me and you feel guilty about all this. It's all fake, right? Have you ever believed what you said in your heart? She suddenly chuckled. Do you know why Su Qing grew up like this? That's because of you. Su Qing has seen you do so many vicious things since she was young. Su Shiqing slapped her on the face. You're not allowed to resist me like this. Su Shiqing's voice was a little angry. You have no right to say that. Because after she had gone missing, he had never thought of having another child. Even though his wife had always wanted to, he still felt that his Su was the best. He had waited for so many years, only to see her betrayal and her undying devotion to another man. You returned to the Su family just for Qin Anlin, right? Su Shiqing's voice was cold. Then I'll let you see how I take away King Entertainment. By then, would you still care about a man who is like a stray dog? Power, and a man like that. I think any smart person would know how to choose. His palm stroked her long hair. Liang Qiu, at that time, I'll give Qin Anlin to you to be your dog. As Su Shiqing said this, he raised his hand. Bring Miss back. Yi Liangqiu didn't resist when she was taken away. Because Su Shiqing had gone crazy. After returning to the Su family, she found that the servants upstairs and downstairs had been replaced. However, those people had straight figures. Even if they were wearing servants' clothes, she could see that they had extraordinary skills and practiced martial arts. In other words, she was under house arrest. From now on, you should reflect on yourself. Su Shiqing stood at the door. As for the company, you don't need to go there for the time being. His gaze was slightly cold as he lowered his eyes. Maybe you don't think I'm a good father, but Liangqiu, I've given you the last bit of warmth in my humanity. Don't waste it. As he said this, he closed the door and took away her cell phone. On her cell phone, he saw a lot of interesting content. His daughter's mind was never on the Su family. As expected. There was no way he could continue with this chess move, but he could use her to negotiate with Qin Anlin. He picked up the phone and dialed Qin Anlin's number. After a while, the phone finally picked up. Chapter 1485. Early in the morning, Yi Liangqiu is lying on the bed when she hears Su Shiqing's voice coming from outside. Miss hasn't gotten up yet. The maid guarding outside the door respectfully replies, yes. After a while, the door is opened. Su Shiqing walks in and closes the door. Seeing that Yi Liangqiu is still lying on the bed, his eyes are somewhat disappointed. He slowly says, it's not my style to let Su Qing go. Liangqiu, don't let Dad down again. Yi Liangqiu turns her face to the side. Perhaps it's her rare childishness that makes Su Shiqing's heart raise a touch of warmth. He sighs, sits down, and gently strokes her long hair with his fingers. In the future, you will know that feelings are the most unreliable thing. She looks up at him. So, you feel that power is reliable, right? Su Shiqing doesn't speak. After a while, he faintly smiles. But power can guarantee that you will live a little happier. She gets up, kneels in front of him, and looks straight into his eyes. Then, are you happy? Do you really pursue power in your heart, or do you want to prove it to someone by having supreme power? Su Shiqing has a kind of embarrassment of being seen through. He narrows his eyes. Did Su Qing tell you that? It's not important. Yi Liangqiu sneers. Dad, so what if you have the whole world? Even if your hands are covered with blood, that person still won't look at you. She will only hate you. Su Shiqing's eyes have a touch of scarlet. He looks at his daughter. After a long time, he says in a low voice, Liangqiu, right? What you think will not happen. What I want, I will get. She is too young to think that love is beautiful. She forgot how humble she used to be in front of Qin Anlin. His daughter was treated as a plaything by Qin Anlin. Just like, he can't forget when he was young, he saw Hongku holding Qin Pei's hand in front of him. Love, right? He wants to let Hongku see how ugly the people in this world are, and how they can't stand the erosion of time. Only his love for her was eternal. Yi Liangqiu looked at his crazy face and pursed her lips without saying anything. There was nothing left to say. Su Shiqing got up. Get up and eat something. You can walk around this house as you please, but you must not step out of the door, otherwise. I can't guarantee your safety, but I can't guarantee the safety of the child in your belly. Yi Liangqiu looked down. Dad, you said that you love me, but I'm actually the same as Su Qing. I'm just a chess piece. I'm just a more advantageous chess piece for you to balance Qin Anlin. Su Shiqing sneered, you saw it clearly. However, it's better not to be too smart. With that, he walked out and closed the door. Yi Liangqiu heard the movement and knew that he had come downstairs. She was not willing to go out until he finished his breakfast. It was still the same house, but it was much gloomier. At this moment, she didn't miss Anlin, but Su Qing. In this house, Su Qing really took care of all the jokes. She didn't think it was funny in the past, but now she missed it. She looked around the villa and bumped into countless walls. The housekeeper kept following her expressionlessly, not giving her any chance to be alone. She couldn't escape at all. And she also knew that Su Shiqing would definitely use her to target Qin Anlin. She had to escape. Chapter 1486. The housekeeper did not make things difficult for her. She went outside to stand guard. Her duty was to make sure that no one walked out of the house. A pregnant woman would not be able to walk out under the watchful eyes of a dozen people. She did not know much about the layout of the Su family's house, nor did she know that the room Yi Liangqiu had entered was Su Cheng's room. The door closed. Yi Liangqiu searched Su Cheng's room and found a lot of good stuff, car keys, a satellite phone, and even a small gun with BB bullets inside. But it was enough. She clenched the things in her hand and sent a message with the satellite phone. Then, she held her breath and waited nervously until she got a response. She slowly let out a sigh of relief and hurriedly replied. On the other side, Qin Anlin put down his phone and looked at Su Qing. Liangqiu is under house arrest. He showed the message to Su Qing. Su Qing looked at it and clenched her hands. If she is not pregnant, I am confident that I can take her away. But she is. Qin Anlin clenched his fingers. I want her and the child to be well. Su Qing nodded. I will bring her back safely. Qin Anlin wanted to meet Su Shiqing and calm him down. He would leave the rest to Su Qing. When it came to Liangqiu, Su Qing was the person he trusted the most because Su Qing loved Liangqiu. Su Qing stretched out her hand. Take out the best car in your garage. Qin Anlin thought for a moment and took out a bunch of car keys from the drawer. It's bulletproof. Su Qing took it. Do you think you're filming a Hollywood blockbuster? But this is really good. Qin Anlin looked at her with a deep gaze. Qing, you have to come back alive. He would also send people to protect them, but the most important thing was to rely on Su Qing. He couldn't trust anyone else. Su Qing's eyes were a little hot and she pursed her lips. After a long while, she said, of course. Bad people live for thousands of years. She patted Qin Anlin's shoulder and said, I'll come back safely and continue to compete with you for Sister Liangqiu. Qin Anlin smiled and patted her back. He raised his hand and looked at his watch, 10:30. I'll be waiting for your call. Su Qing nodded and walked out first. Qin Anlin called Kaim and arranged for someone to pick him up. Today, Su Shiqing had asked him to have a chat. He clearly knew that the content of the chat was to threaten him with Liangqiu. Although everything had been arranged, he still felt a little uneasy. He stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, smoked a cigarette, and looked at the entire B city. Surrounded by the smoke, he was able to calm down a little. Su Shiqing had gone crazy. Even if Liangqiu was his daughter, there was no guarantee that he wouldn't hurt her. He just stood there, his heart burning, but he tried his best to appear calm. At 9:00 sharp, Keim walked in and said in a steady voice, "President Qin, it's about time." Qin Anlin slowly turned his head and nodded with a cold expression. "Let's go." Half an hour later, the car stopped in front of the ATV. Keim stopped the car and nodded at Qin Anlin. "It's all arranged. On the surface, Su Shiqing won't dare to do anything to me." Qin Anlin buttoned his coat and got out of the car. Keim followed beside him and a few other attendants. Chapter 1487. Qin Anlin sat down and smiled faintly. "It hasn't been peaceful recently. It's better to protect yourself." Su Shiqing chuckled. "Where's Qing? Why don't I see her? She did something wrong and doesn't dare to go home." Qin Anlin looked at him. "She's staying at my place for a few days." Su Shiqing's gaze was deep as he looked at Qin Anlin for a long time. Children don't know any better. Anlin should be more understanding. Of course. Qin Anlin also smiled faintly. The two of them talked for a long time before they got to the main topic. Why didn't Mr. Yi come to the project that Mr. Yi was in charge of? Qin Anlin asked casually. Su Shiqing picked up the tea on the table and took a sip. Liangqiu didn't do a good job in dealing with ATV and King Entertainment projects. She's not in good health, so she won't be working for the time being. He hinted at the fact that Liangqiu was under house arrest. Qin Anlin's fingers clenched tightly, but his face remained calm. "Then I should go visit her. After all, she's pregnant with my child. It would be unreasonable not to go." Su Shiqing's fingers slowly rubbed the edge of the cup and he smiled. "She still needs to rest now. We'll see later." He raised his hand and motioned for Linda to put the document in front of Qin Anlin. "This was given to me by Liangqiu. She said that it was the content of the discussion with you. President Qin, take a look. If there's no problem, you can sign it." Qin Anlin's gaze fell on his face, and he could faintly see the threat. He looked down at the contents of the document and looked at his watch. 10:10. He looked very slowly. When he saw the last item, his gaze froze. 75%. Su Shiqing really had a big appetite. Whoever signed such a contract would be a fool. Qin Anlin put it down. Before he could speak, Su Shiqing spoke again. Su Shiqing said calmly, "Liangqiu is my only heir, so I plan to give her 20% of what is in her mother's hands." Qin Anlin didn't say anything. "Anlin, I know you like Liangqiu. How about this, if you want to marry her, 20% of King Entertainment's shares, the same as ATV's." "That would be fair," Su Shiqing said calmly, as if he was buying cabbages at the market. Keim clenched her fists. This old thing was too despicable and shameless. He could sign it. He still held 30% of ATV's shares and had absolute control. As for King Entertainment, President Qin had already handed over 10%. If he transferred another 20%, Yi Liangqiu would be on par with President Qin. At that time, Su Shiqing would control Yi Liangqiu and King Entertainment would fall into his hands. What a shameless scheme. How could he have the cheek to say it out loud? Compared to Keim's anger, Qin Anlin's expression was much calmer. He smiled slightly. If benefits are involved in marriage, it doesn't seem very sincere. Isn't it too unreasonable for Anlin to think like that? Su Shiqing's fingers gently clasped the cup in his hand. "I know this child is very important to you and to Mu Yun, so my request is not too much." He paused. We can talk about marriage later. I think it's better to sign today's contract as soon as possible. Kym looked at Qin Anlin. Was this shameless old man going to use the child to threaten President Qin? Chapter 1488. By then, it would be much easier for Su Shiqing to deal with King Entertainment. Anlin. If you're pinning your hopes on Mr. Du, I advise you to give up on that idea. Su Shiqing made his intentions clear. Mr. Du is playing it safe now. The winner among us will be his partner. Qin Anlin's gaze fell on the document and he laughed lightly. Is family really that worthless to you? She'll still be my daughter after I get what I want. Su Shiqing was betting on Qin Anlin's reluctance. The one who cared more would be the one who lost. Qin Anlin pursed his lips. His watch was already pointing at 10:30. But his cell phone didn't ring. Had Su Qing failed? He closed his eyes and clenched his fists. After a long time, he said calmly, "All right, I'll sign it." Kym was a little shocked. He cried out involuntarily, "President Qin." Qin Anlin stopped him. "I've already made up my mind. Nothing was more important than Liang Qiu's life. When faced with a lunatic, all you could do was threaten him." In that instant, Su Shiqing seemed to be ecstatic, but he was even more surprised. Because he had always placed his interests at the top. He had never thought that to Qin Anlin, emotions would be above power, and he would compromise so easily. Qin Anlin glanced at him and took the pen that Kym handed over with tears in his eyes. Then he looked at Su Shiqing and lowered his head to sign it. The words on the paper were strong and forceful, almost cutting through the paper. Just as he finished the last stroke, his cell phone rang. Qin Anlin was relieved. He held the contract and tore it in half. Su Shiqing, who had been ecstatic and thought that King Entertainment would be his in the future, was stunned. "President Qin, are you messing with me?" Kym took it and tore it into pieces. All that was left was to throw it at the shameless old man's face. He snorted and said, "Yes, I was just messing with you." Su Shiqing's face suddenly turned ugly, but he suddenly smiled gently. "It seems that Anlin, you are still the same kind of person as me. I didn't want to do anything to my own daughter, but now, it all depends on her luck." His voice was cold. "You probably don't know, but Liang Qiu looks like Mr. Du's deceased wife. It seems that I can only cooperate with Mr. Du, but it's a pity for that child." As soon as he finished speaking, Kym couldn't hold it in anymore. This shameless old man. A mouthful of tea was poured directly onto Su Shiqing's face. At that moment, both sides pulled out their guns and pointed at each other's men. Su Shiqing gently removed the tea powder from his face and said in a cold voice, "Anlin, you are getting worse and worse at training your subordinates." As he spoke, he looked up with an indescribable coldness in his eyes. "What are you doing? Put down the gun in your hand." He laughed lightly again and said, "Anlin, you can think about it again. There's no need." Qin Anlin's voice was very calm. He had already stood up and said, "CEO Su, take care." Seeing him leave without any reluctance, Su Shiqing said exasperatedly, "Aren't you afraid that I will do something to her? Maybe her child is gone, or at night she—" "I won't," Qin Anlin interrupted him. "I'll protect my own woman." Su Shiqing was about to say something when his cell phone rang. He picked it up and threw it away. Chapter 1489. On the other side, Liang Qiu held the small Browning in her hand and pointed it at the housekeeper's head. "Take me out." The housekeeper raised her hands and looked around, trying to find a chance to escape. But the gun was pressed against her head, and her body was pressed against the railing. Liang Qiu looked down at her and said sternly, get your men to stand in a row downstairs. The housekeeper was unwilling to give up. She didn't move for a long time, and then she sneered, "You won't dare to shoot. Have you ever killed anyone? Do you know how it feels to have blood splattered on your face?" Yi Liangqiu tilted her head and looked at the woman in front of her. She smiled gently. "How do you know that I haven't killed anyone?" She took a step forward and grabbed the woman's neck with one hand. Her expression was a little twisted. "I'm Su Shiqing's daughter. You know what he's capable of, right? Do you think I haven't killed anyone?" The gun was raised. "Do you want to try, huh?" A crack appeared on the housekeeper's impeccable face, and she didn't say anything for a long time. "Let all of them squat downstairs." Yi Liangqiu's voice was a little harsh. "Otherwise, I'll blow your head off." The housekeeper glared at her, but in the end, she did as she was told. Yi Liangqiu said calmly, "Go downstairs now. Don't play any tricks." She held the woman downstairs, pointed the gun loaded with BB bullets at her, and walked downstairs step by step. She walked all the way to the parking lot outside, and saw Su Cheng's car. It was an orange Lamborghini. She held the gun in one hand and opened the car door with the other. At the same time, she pressed the butt of the gun against the housekeeper's waist. The woman lunged forward, but she was also a ruthless person. She immediately turned around and pulled the door open. Yi Liangqiu quickly locked the door and rammed into it. The housekeeper cried out in pain. Her arm was almost broken, and she desperately tried to pull it out. She asked her men in the villa to stop Yi Liangqiu. Yi Liangqiu quickly started the car, took 2 steps backward, and hit the housekeeper. She knocked the housekeeper to the ground and stopped the car. She pointed the gun at the housekeeper and shouted at the women who ran out of the villa, "Step back. Put the gun down." The women were hesitant. Then, someone said something and they all rushed over. Yi Liangqiu raises her hand and shoots at them. "Everyone, get down." But what came out was a BB bullet. After shooting, Yi Liangqiu throws the gun at the housekeeper. It hits her head and the housekeeper faints. However, those women chased after him like crazy and got into the car one after another. Yi Liangqiu and their car drove out of the villa one after another. Those female killers shot at her car. Yi Liangqiu's car drove left and right, but it was still shot. The tire burst, and the car skidded and almost turned over. The car came to an emergency stop. Yi Liangqiu sat in the car. Through the rearview mirror, she saw those women coming up from behind. Each of them had a gun in their hand, and there was a murderous look on their faces. She turned her face and looked at the other side of the intersection. A black sports car sped up in the middle of the road. Then, with 2 whistles, it madly rammed into those women. The bullets hit the car like a hornet's nest, but the car didn't dodge. It was so fast that it made them tremble. Those women quickly got into the car and drove away. Chapter 1490. Yi Liangqiu immediately jumped into the car, which made Su Qing frown. "Are you pregnant or not? Are you still a woman? Don't talk about pregnancy now." Yi Liangqiu immediately closed the door, and then the car flew out like an arrow leaving the bow. Su Qing threw a gun to her. "Open the sunroof and blow up the front of the first car." Yi Liangqiu got into the car and looked at her. "You seem to be very experienced." Su Qing smiled sweetly. "Sit tight." Su Cheng's driving skills were at the level of a racing driver. The car drove forward for a few hundred meters, and then suddenly reversed, and the cars behind immediately turned instinctively. Yi Liangqiu almost threw up, but she still opened the sunroof and shot behind. "Is it accurate?" Su Cheng's hands quickly turned the steering wheel. With a bang, 2 cars crashed into each other. Yi Liangqiu sat down and smiled. It's okay. Su Cheng looked at her in the rearview mirror and raised a finger. Good job. Sit tight. You'll feel a little dizzy at the back, but you won't collide with other cars. The car sped forward, and the cars behind it immediately lined up and chased after it, always keeping a distance of 100 meters. Lingering ghosts. Su Cheng sneered and pressed a button on the side. The trunk of the sports car was opened, and two black barrels stretched out from inside. This car is so cool. Su Cheng drove the car to the no man's land, and there were only a few cars in front and behind. Yi Liangqiu looked at Su Cheng. Su Cheng explained, this car comes with its own equipment. Isn't it cool? She saw the cars spread out in the rearview mirror and sneered. This kind of bullet had a self-guided function, and it was impossible to escape. Su Cheng pressed the button gently and said excitedly, let's kill them. Yi Liangqiu looked at her and said coldly, Africa and India are more suitable for you. Su Cheng let out a few howls and the bullets whizzed through the air. Bam! There were several loud bangs from the back of the car. However, a few more black sports cars sped out of the thick smoke. As Su Cheng's car sped forward, 10 black limousines suddenly appeared on both sides. About 20 people got out of the limousines and fired at the back with their cannons. Thick smoke billowed. Su Cheng giggled, that old thing, Su Shicheng, must be hopping mad. Yi Liangqiu looked at the thick smoke behind the car. How are we going to deal with the aftermath? Don't worry. Neither Qin Anlin nor Su Shicheng wants to take the blame for this kind of thing. In the end, it will be a fight between the gangs. Su Cheng drove the car quickly and arrived at the apartment in less than half an hour. Qin Anlin was already waiting there. He stood beside the car with a cold expression. Beside him, Kaim was rubbing his hands nervously. Su Cheng stopped the car and jumped out first. She waved to Qin Anlin. Anlin Gu, I brought your wife back. Her little face was full of desire for praise. Qin Anlin walked forward slowly and reached out. After a moment of hesitation, he touched her little head. In fact, his mood was very complicated. He wanted to see Liangqiu, but now he was a little timid. In the end, he reached out to comfort Su Cheng in the stupidest way possible. Su Cheng was embarrassed. Anlin Gu, I don't like men. Don't give me that. Qin Anlin smiled. Then he lowered his head and gently opened the door. They hadn't seen each other for a few days, but he felt that a century had passed. Chapter 1491. She wanted to get out of the car, but Qin Anlin reached out to catch her. His eyes were a little hot. He held her slender arm, put one hand on her shoulder, and hugged her gently. Su Cheng had been a little happy just now. She finally had someone to love and dote on her. But now, she felt like she had been treated like a dog. She poked Qin Anlin's shoulder and said, At least I risked my life for you. So noisy. Qin Anlin frowned and said in a low voice, Kaim, bring her to stay at your place. And protect her. Kaim was dumbfounded. He would protect Su Cheng. Then who would protect her? Su Cheng was like a diamond. When she was with him, he was the one who was in danger, okay? Su Cheng was also a little dissatisfied with this arrangement. She dragged Kaim into the car and said, What's wrong? Are you afraid that I'll eat you up? Then she snorted and said, I told you that I don't like men, especially men who are neither male nor female. Kaim gave her the middle finger and said, I'm not neither male nor female. You think making a rude gesture makes you a man? Su Cheng smirked coldly and started the car. The speed of the car was supermanly. Kaim leaned against the window and vomited. However, Suchin didn't show any mercy and continued to drive away. She was so eye-catching, Yi Liangqiu looked in the direction of the car and was dazed for a while. She is actually quite cute. She was conflicted. Although Su Qing had saved her and she felt sorry for Su Qing, she still killed Xing Yuan. Qin Anlin knew what she was thinking, so he patted her and said, "Let her make her own decision." Su Qing was an elf who lived in the dark, and Liangqiu was her last ray of light. The current Su Qing made Qin Anlin feel like a moth flying into a flame. He couldn't bear to see her like this. Yi Liangqiu bit her lip and nodded. Then he lowered his head, his forehead against hers. At this moment, he truly felt that he had returned safely. His handsome features were unprecedentedly gentle and he kissed her lips. "Let's go home." She nodded, and he carried her back to the apartment like a princess and carried her straight into their bedroom. He hadn't been back for a long time, but the place was still the same as before. He reached out and gently placed her on the bed, half kneeling. "I'll get Dr. May to come and check on you." After this, he was afraid of hurting the child. But just as he was about to make the call, she quickly hugged him. Unable to move, he could only raise his palm high and lower his head helplessly. "Liangqiu, what's wrong?" She didn't say anything and continued to hug his neck. She shook her head and buried her face in his neck. "No. I just want to hug you." Her face snuggled into his neck, soft as a small animal's. His heart softened unbelievably. He hugged her and said in a low voice, "Be good." "What's wrong? Don't leave me." Her fingers tightened. "Anlin, I don't want to be checked." She was a little shameless and was even harder to appease than little Mu Yun. He found it funny and a little heartache, but at the same time, he felt proud. She was so attached to him. "Okay, I won't check on you. I'll just hug you, okay?" He patiently coaxed her, hugging her and patting her as if he was coaxing a baby. His Liangqiu was so tall, but at this moment, she was also weak in his arms and needed his protection. She was so brave, but after returning from the ordeal, she was so fragile and needed a hug. "I won't leave you again." He coaxed her unconditionally. Chapter 1492. She hugged him shamelessly and buried her face in his chest. She had never been so clingy before. His heart was beating so fast that it felt like it was going to jump out of his chest. He lowered his head and kissed her passionately. After kissing for a while, his movements became gentler. He sucked on her lips and kissed her slowly, as if she was his most precious treasure. His soft lips touched hers, one after another. It was so touching. Her eyebrows were lowered, and her long hair was scattered over her shoulders. She looked indescribably soft. "Liangqiu, kiss me." His strong palms caressed her waist, and his voice was hoarse. His lips were pressed against hers, and his gaze was deep. Her body trembled slightly, and she looked down, not daring to look at him. After not getting a response from her for a long time, he seemed to be a little impatient and bit her lips lightly. She moaned and looked up at him. Her eyes were moist, and her voice was weak. "Anlin. Kiss me, Liangqiu." His hot lips moved to the back of her ear, and his voice sounded urgent. "Hurry up and kiss me. I'm afraid I'll hurt you." His breath blew behind her ear, and it made her shiver, a large palm pressed against the back of her head, slowly pushing her towards him. Slowly, her lips were firmly sealed. Although they had kissed countless times, she was still very nervous at this moment. Her eyes were wide open, and she looked at him with a hint of horror. She was embarrassed and embarrassed. "Liangqiu, close your eyes." There was a hint of a smile in his tone. "It's my fault for not teaching you well." Her eyes opened even wider, and she just stared at him like that, as if she was determined to go against him. He chuckled and lowered his lips to hers. Are you sure you want to keep your eyes open? Her eyes blinked lightly, and she actually looked a little mischievous. Then, Qin Anlin did something extremely shameful. His hand went under the hem of her shirt. She immediately closed her eyes and buried her face in his neck, gasping for breath. No. There was a hint of tenderness in her voice. He laughed darkly. Aren't you not afraid? His hands didn't stop moving. Instead, he tortured her even more. But in the end, he couldn't bear to do anything to her. In the end, he still served her gently. He kissed her until she was in a daze. She took the initiative to hug him and beg him. However, Qin Anlin didn't dare to touch her. He sighed inwardly and let her feel comfortable for a while before turning to the side and carefully pulling her into his arms. She was still trembling and hadn't come back to her senses. Her long eyelashes were lightly trembling with tears, making her look very lovable. He knew she was frightened. Although it had happened a few times, she was still not used to it. Are you all right? He kissed her forehead. As he kissed her, he felt something again. He kissed down her nose and covered her mouth. Yi Liangqiu struggled left and right, but in the end, her palm landed on his face. He was a little confused. Isn't it dirty? She closed her eyes and turned her face to the side, but her face was flushed red. Qin Anlin was stunned for a while before he thought of the reason, and he started to chuckle. He gently held her sweaty face and kissed her face affectionately. When it was comfortable just now, you didn't ask me to stop. I didn't even dislike you, but you did. Chapter 1493. Qin Anlin held her down with one hand and supported his body with the other. He kissed her from above, not giving her a chance to escape. This kiss was a little mischievous. The more she tried to avoid it, the happier he kissed her. In the end, she was bullied by him until she cried. She cried softly and stopped struggling. Her body softened and she looked like she was at his mercy. The more she behaved like this, the more mischievous he became. He kissed and rubbed her, asking in her ear, I'll make you happy again, okay? As he spoke, he was about to kiss her. Yi Liangqiu hurriedly said no, then grabbed his hair and stopped him from kissing her. What's wrong? He turned his body and hugged her, coaxing her. No. She buried her face in his chest and said in a low voice. Feeling her tremble, his heart softened. He even regretted teasing her like this. It took him a while to coax her because she had fallen asleep. Qin Anlin caressed her long hair and his expression became gentle. He brushed the hair away from her face and placed his palm on her cheek, looking at her carefully. She had lost weight. She had always been thin, but now she looked haggard. He knew how much she had suffered in the Su family. Liangqiu, I regret it. I shouldn't have let you go back. He sighed and wanted to get up to cook something for her. But just as he was about to stand up, his waist was wrapped around by a pair of arms. Don't go. She hugged him, her voice full of dependence. Anlin, I want you to stay with me. She pressed her face against his back, looking indescribably reliant. Qin Anlin's voice was a little hoarse. Look at you. You're like a child. But he still stayed. He turned his body sideways and let her rest on his shoulder, coaxing her to sleep. She hadn't had a good night's sleep for days, so she slept a little soundly. But as soon as he moved, she would immediately wake up, her expression deeply insecure. Qin Anlin stayed with her until she woke up at 4 in the afternoon. She opened her eyes and looked at him, blinking. Her expression was a little cute. Who do you think you can see? His voice was a little hoarse as he kissed the tip of her nose. She was startled. After a long time, she touched her nose and slowly asked, "Have you brushed your teeth?" "You heartless thing." He pinched her cheek. "I want you to serve me once." She blushed and glared at him. "I'll help you cook. Be good and let me get up." He reached out and patted her. "You're not hungry, but my little baby is." Yi Liangqiu glanced at him. "Go ahead." However, Qin Anlin picked her up and walked outside. She screamed, "What are you doing? Cook with me." He didn't want to see her, not even for a moment. After that, she was wearing his shirt, sitting on the counter with her long legs bare, watching him cook. And it was a macho show, because his shirt was on her. "I couldn't tell, but you have a good figure." She grabbed an apple and nibbled on it as she looked at his beautiful figure. Qin Anlin cut the vegetables deftly and looked at her sideways. He said slowly, "It's not like you haven't seen it before." Yi Liangqiu nibbled on the apple, her voice indistinct. "The lighting isn't that good." Chapter 1494. She was still looking at him lecherously as she nibbled on the apple as if she was nibbling on his pork ribs. Qin Anlin smiled and lowered his eyes to continue cooking for her. He made a steamed pork ribs with rice flour, an egg with spring onions, and 2 stir-fried dishes. She was enjoying it and almost licked the plate. He didn't eat much. He watched her eat with a smile and kept serving her food. "Eat slowly." He couldn't help reminding her. He was a little shocked. Her appetite hadn't been very good a while ago, but now it was so good. Yi Liangqiu puffed up her cheeks and said, "It's delicious." She smiled at him, but as she smiled, tears welled up in her eyes. The way she forced herself to smile was ugly, but it hit the softest spot in his heart. Qin Anlin sighed and wiped away the tears from the corners of her eyes. His voice was unbelievably gentle. "Silly, eat more if it's delicious. Why are you crying?" She looked at him and bit her lip. Yi Liangqiu was strong, but she couldn't be strong now. She wanted to cry. Because the man in front of her was Qin Anlin, the man who loved her. She naturally wanted to act coquettishly to him and show him her weakest side without pretending. Tears rolled down his cheeks. He was a little flustered because he couldn't wipe them away no matter how hard he tried. Finally, he stood up and walked to her side. He hugged her and said, "Liangqiu, cry if you want to. I'm here." He could understand her. He could understand that she had lost her mother and her father at the same time. "You still have me, Mu Yun, and the child in your belly." His voice was gentle. "I'll always be by your side." She looked up. "But you can't be a father." He smiled and his gaze became gentler. He stroked her head and said, "I can give you what a father can give. I can also give you what a father can't." As he spoke, his gaze fell on her lips. The hint was very obvious. Yi Liangqiu cursed inwardly. Glaring at him, the little bit of sadness he felt was completely gone. "I'm telling the truth." He lovingly rubbed her head and paused for a moment before saying meaningfully, "Actually, I don't really mind if you call me Daddy." Could he still have some integrity? Yi Liangqiu was speechless and ignored him. He cleared the dishes and chased her out to watch TV. She sat there, comfortably sipping the fruit tea he had made, listening to the sounds of him washing dishes in the kitchen. She suddenly felt blissful. As long as she was by his side, she felt blissful. After finishing his chores, Qin Anlin washed his hands and walked over to sit beside her. "Go to Mom's place tonight and pick up Muyun, okay?" She looked at him. "I'm going too." "What? Are you afraid that my mom will eat you?" He looked at her and asked seriously. Her expression also slowly became cold. She and he both knew that this topic was a hurdle that could not be crossed. No. I don't think she welcomes me. Her voice was a little low. Then, she raised her eyes, feeling a little confused. We. In the end, she didn't say it out loud. Qin Anlin looked at her for a while before asking, "What about us? Forget it. Or do you not care about the status and only want to have children without getting married?" She didn't say anything. He guessed what she was thinking and sneered, "You're so generous." Also, Yi Liangqiu, when did you become so generous to have 2 children for free? Chapter 1495. Qin Anlin's expression did not look too good. He stared at her for a long time before saying, "Go on. Why don't you say that you have my love? You've already said it. I don't need to say anything else." She looked at him carefully. She had never been so careful before. He was both annoyed and amused. She had always been at Sundra. Since when did she act like a little wife? He glared at her. She looked at him and then lowered her head. "Very good. As long as I love you, it's fine, right? Then in the future, other than you, I can also marry a legitimate wife who can sleep with me at night and bear my children." His voice was filled with ridicule. "Yi Liangqiu, you're quite generous." She looked at him hatefully. "I didn't say that." He looked back at her with a burning gaze, filled with deceitful approval. "You're not allowed to marry anyone else," she said childishly and turned her face to the side. However, he did not let her go. He pinched her sharp chin and forced her to look at him. "But I can't be a bachelor forever." "You're not really a bachelor," she retorted. She was not confident, so her voice was a little soft. He touched his ear. "What did you say?" "You can marry me." This time, it was her turn to be shameless. Qin Anlin finally smiled. He reached out and pulled her into his arms. "I know you can't bear to. You can't bear to give me to someone else, right? You can't bear to see me treat other women like this, right?" As he said that, he shamelessly moved his hands and feet. Yi Liangqiu was speechless. She patted his hand. "Haven't you done enough to other women in the past?" Qin Anlin looked at her. "Can we not talk about the past?" He was thick-skinned. "If it wasn't for the past, I wouldn't be able to serve you so comfortably now, right?" She looked at him and slapped his handsome face. She didn't hold back at all. Qin Anlin covered his face, but he was not angry. He still hugged her. "Does your hand hurt?" "Qin Anlin, you're a pervert," she couldn't help but say. He hugged her and laughed. "Yes, I'm a pervert. But doesn't our Liangqiu like me as a pervert?" She raised her hand again, wanting to slap him, but he stopped her halfway. He placed her finger in his mouth and bit it gently. "I can't let you get addicted to hitting me." He suddenly sighed. "Liangqiu, will you blame me in the future?" Because he and Su Shiqing were definitely incompatible like fire and water. Their last layer of cordiality had already been torn. She was a little startled, and after a while, she said softly, "No." Because she was convinced that he wouldn't hurt her too much. To love someone, or to be loved, one should trust the other. He hugged her and rested for another 2 hours. When it was time for dinner, he went to Lady Qin's place to scrounge a meal. That way, he would feel less uncomfortable. But no one thought that Su Shiqing would be there. Qin Anlin held Yi Liangqiu's hand and stood at the door, looking at Su Shiqing who was sitting on the sofa. Su Shiqing smiled. "Anlin, you're here." Qin Anlin looked at Yi Liangqiu. Her face was a little pale. She clenched her fists and said, I don't know if it's a coincidence, or if it's intentional, CEO Sue. Su Shiching stood up. Of course it's intentional. Seeing that you and Liangqiu are so close, Hongke and I have already discussed that the 16th of the Mid-Autumn Festival will be a good day, Su Shiching said calmly. You're tuning in to the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.